I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now with me, Holly Doan from Blacklock's. Um, this is the second time we've done an interview.
Nice to see
Media,
you again.
nice to see you again. You look great. You're out
Thank
there in
you.
Ottawa, I take it. And
I see a cloudy day over your mountains.
there you go. Media still in trouble in Canada. Bureaucrats still deciding who is media, who's not media, who gets funded. And why I reached out is I saw that story on the funding for Politico and just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, the story was that you're referencing in the United States, of course, Donald Trump dictating the agenda on a lot of things now. And he was defunding the organization USAID, which apparently had been giving about an $8 million license to the American outlet Politico. So there was some outrage over that. Like, why were they worth 8 million? What was Politico getting out of it? What were they giving in return? We saw yesterday that Politico put out a statement. They were indignant that they're transparent and objective news agency, and of course, government licenses their content, and that $8 million was quote unquote market value. So maybe people would be surprised to know that the Canadian government also licenses media. And I'm not talking about the media subsidies or the commonly known as the media bailout. That's something different. For time immemorial, even before there was an internet, when it was just a newspaper clipping service, the government of Canada has licensed media so that public servants across the government can read, can stay informed. So it happens here too.
Yeah, so the Canadian government has spent about, in that story there, about close to $100,000 on Politico.
Oh, more than that. I think that was in a year, but over
Mm,
a 5 year span, it was more like $1.5 million.
mm.
The problem is that it comes from different departments. So the Department of Agriculture had a $118,000 subscription to Politico. Somebody else, Privy Council, had one that was worth 10. Foreign Affairs, something else. When Stephen Harper was prime minister, one of the things he tried to do was consolidate all of this media buy under one licensing agency, that is the Department of Public Works and Procurement. Not too successful. Clearly, obviously, all departments are still cooking their own deals with media outlets as to what they want to pay. Blacklocks over the years has watched those contracts like a hawk to see who is being paid. What's interesting about it is that the rates fluctuate. You could have the Globe and Mail getting a $500,000 one year and $1.2 million the next year. You could have small agencies getting a quarter million one year and then the next year nothing. They don't appear. So it's a bit haphazard, and we believe that the bureaucracy also is in the business of subscribing to friendly media. The subscriptions, of course, public servants should be informed. Of course, they should read what the public is saying, what journalists are writing about their work. That's important. We're not arguing that they should not license media. What we're suggesting, and that everybody in this town knows, that licenses are discretionary and are frequently awarded to friendly media for good coverage.
Yeah, you've had your own court fight where they kind of take advantage of your subscription wall, and then they use one license to kind of like share it amongst everybody, and that's a court battle you've been fighting for many years now.
Right. So you'll notice we noted Politico getting $1.5 million. The last contract I saw for the Toronto Star in 2022 was 1.7 million through Public Works. Blacklock's reporter, since our inception in 2012, has never had government subscriptions. The reason is because almost as soon as we hung up our shingle, a year later, we discovered multiple departments, upwards of 2 dozen, were buying online subscriptions to our product, just like one like you have,
Yeah.
Jim. A single user would buy a subscription. They were doing that, and then they were sharing the password among several employees who were tasked with the job of, they call it media monitoring. That is where they aggregate all the relevant stories, let's say about health, if you're working for the health department, so all your employees want to read what media is writing about health. So they were aggregating our stories and shotgunning them across large groups of people. I mentioned Health Canada. So for instance, Health Canada in 2014 had a single Blacklock subscription. Through access to information, we learned that they shared the password 7 times, 7 names on the email. We know their names. And then over the next year, 12 months, they cut and paste 122 stories and sent them to 1,193 email addresses. I had sent a note to them after we observed a single subscription saying, you have to be licensed. And they said, yeah, the media person said, yeah, all good. After we caught them through access to information, distributing content that widely off a single subscription, which was then $147. Remember, Toronto Star got 1.7 million. They then just, what happens successively with each government department, they just kick it over to justice. And we've been in court for the last 11 years fighting to stop this predatory government from sharing passwords and distributing content without license. It's like buying one Microsoft for your office of 30 people and everybody sharing it. It's the same thing.
And except the office is massive, not just 30 people. And I guess it's a tougher pill for sure when you see Politico getting that money and it's a US-based organization. And I just saw a tweet from Francois Champagne saying, thank you to Politico for letting us use your offices while we're in the United States. I was just like, okay.
An interesting observation about that is that it was a bit unnerving that Ministers Blair and Champagne had traveled down to Washington to try to exert some of Canada's influence in a trade war. And the best they could do was a meeting with the staff of Politico. Shows you how much access we have in Washington right now. But I guess there's a friendly relationship if you've been funding this organization. And I'm my two cents, Jim, that kind of dollar figure for an American outlet, though they have a small Canadian presence, is what you would call a friendly relationship contract.
Yeah, and we have our own fight that I'll try to put it in a nutshell, and you and I have talked about it before, is Bill C-18 has taken away our audience of about 200,000 because the government decided to get into a fight with Meta. We thought it was a symbiotic relationship where we put content up. We willingly put our content on Meta. They didn't steal anything. We put it up there and we got traffic in return. And that was Meta's response to the government saying you have to pay. They said, well, they should pay us because we're giving them traffic. And they ended up with this Bill C-18, which Meta then said, well, we're not paying. So they blocked all the news outlets from being on Canadians Can't Access News on Meta or any Meta platform. And then the federal government said they'll support us, but they won't advertise on Meta either. And just yesterday they came out and said, yeah, well, a lot of Canadians get their news online and we don't have access to that anymore, so we're going to have to advertise. So they started advertising it, and they've also said to the various departments that you go ahead and you can start advertising on Meta. Meanwhile, news outlets are still left in the dark, and it's really cut traffic. And I mean, in all news outlets across Canada, traffic has been dramatically down. Canadians aren't getting news. I think we did a story, and it might be like 4 times less news Canadians are consuming because that's where they get their news. And it's still handicapping us, and we can't get answers. We've tried to do interviews, we've tried to do a whole bunch of things, and we don't get funded either, as you don't get funded.
No, we don't take subsidies.
Yeah.
So I mean, your income was from Meta. Ours was from our subscription, which is why we're really concerned about protecting that paywall. That paywall is everything to us. It's our livelihood. So when you have the biggest corporation in the land, the government of Canada, stealing, which is what it is, from the nation's tiniest publisher, there's something wrong. But I mean, worse than that, the federal court last year ruled that it's okay. The government of Canada can do this. And I will quote from Judge Yvan Roy of the Federal Court of Canada. He said that it was okay for, quote, any legitimate business reason, unquote, business reason, to share a password. He stated no limit on how much the password should be shared. And the reason for the government having that right, as the judge estimated was that the government needed to, quote, protect the public and the media. So it had to have the power to read what Blacklock was saying. It just didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah, so protect the media. Not a very good job
Right.
of protecting the media.
Right.
I
So,
mean,
but this isn't just my paywall. This
yeah,
is now anybody who's running
yeah,
a paywall, the
for
Globe
sure.
or the
Hmm.
Logic or anybody that
Yeah,
if a large corporation wanted to just buy one subscription and share the
yeah.
password and distribute the content, the law, as this judge supposes it to be, says you can. Now we've appealed, but
Hmm.
we have no hope that the court. Listen, you'll know this. Media is in a tailspin. Like
Yeah.
the internet disruption has been profound, and media ourselves, all of us, are struggling to understand what the way forward and how we can make a business out of this and how to fund media. If we don't, if the nation's most erstwhile publishers don't understand what to do, I guess the government bureaucrats don't get it either. Unfortunately, they've been in a position of legislating imposition on your company and trying to earn for themselves the right to steal from my company.
Yeah.
So the government here has really done nothing but delay the progress, and that is disruption and rebuilding.
Yeah, for the past 10 years, I would say that, they say they're trying to help, but if you look at the stock charts of companies like Chorus, which is global, and Glacier Media and all those companies, they're all in a tailspin. And we did a story recently, and it was like 50 independent media outlets have already folded. Many are going under. The government, with what it's doing with Bill C-18 and not paying the right amount to use, is not helping media. The best thing they can do for media is get out of the way.
I would suggest to you, my 2 cents, they don't care about independent media.
Hmm.
The government sees independent media as an unknown and may be dangerous. They really, what the aim of the subsidies is to prop up the legacy media. But whether those entities are subsidized or not are going to decay and eventually disappear, because we can't put our finger in the dike forever and hold back what's happening in media. But for instance, in our case, how do I know that the government, their intention is not exactly copyright or password sharing in Blacklock's case? How do I know that it isn't really a rework of our technological protection measures law? Here's how I know. The opening remarks by the Government of Canada Justice Department counsel at the start of our trial were this. He said, Senior Counsel Alexander Gay from the Justice Department said, "Your Honor, Blacklock's reporter is yellow journalism, fake facts, and sensational headlines," unquote. The judge said, okay, that's not what this trial is about. This trial is about technological protection measures and paywalls and sharing passwords. But that's how they commenced their arguments. So understand that the government is, this government in particular, and I'm talking about not only the bureaucracy, but the political side, has a media control fetish.
Yeah.
They see the ability to deliver the message to Canadians as slipping away. It's slipping into the hands of entities they can't. I mean, you can't golf with the publisher at Blacklock's Reporter or even at your outlet, right? As in the old days, what they used to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't. There's too many new voices, and the government has had a trouble controlling them. So I kind of think that, unfortunately for us, we are career journalists. Our editor and I both have 43 years in the media industry with private outlets, as well as I worked for CBC for many years. I was a Beijing bureau chief for CTV National News. Our background is not in public relations or politics or any kind of partisan lobbying effort. We are career journalists and have been trying to help the media ecosphere by adding more serious reporting. But the government doesn't understand what it can't control what it doesn't understand. And so they want to suggest that any outlet that is not the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, is like Breitbart, They want to
Yeah.
say that everybody is like the rebel. And this is not saying anything against Ezra Levant and the rebel. They do their thing. But they have yet to understand through the legislation that has hurt you, or the ripoffs in the case of Blacklocks, that you can't control the media. And as you say, you just need to step back.
Yeah, no, it's very disheartening that more isn't being done even from the opposition. I mean, I've had conversations with lots of the Conservatives as well, and they're just like they're saying is patience, and patience is tough when you're trying to make payroll for the reporters that work here, right? I mean, we have journalists that like, and I'm sure you know who Kent Mulgad is, that worked for
Yes.
CTV, ran the CTV desk, and then for them to say that we're not a news organization where we have the most experienced newsroom in the Okanagan, right, with Kent Mulgad and Steve McNall and all these other people, and yet they have these subjective ways that they can phrase things. Michael Geist did a story on us too, and says this doesn't make any sense. But I mean, people can say that, but they have all the power, and they don't have to explain themselves, because the responses we get back from them are just boilerplate responses. We got a response back from Justin Trudeau's office today that basically said, "I passed your information on to Pascal St. Ange." Okay,
Yeah.
we've talked to her in person, and she basically said, we support independent journalism, and that's end of story. What does that mean?
No, they don't support independent. Sorry, that's just not true. Because they give $250,000 a year to the National Observer or to the Narwhal
Yeah.
or to the Logic, that doesn't. If they support independent journalism, they would find some kind of remedy to this Facebook crisis, and they would get out of court with Blacklocks and agree that their people stole our material and shotgunned it, instead of trying to change their own law in a way that will wreck everyone's paywall. I mean, the thing is, we were talking earlier about friendly licensing and government, Visa Politico, government licensing media. And someone else said, well, what are you complaining about? It's market value. These crazy, huge figures are market value. But I want to tell you a couple of stories, if you don't mind me telling a couple of secrets about how we know this isn't true. The first one, some years ago, I noticed a very small contract at Public Works for a New Brunswick weekly, which I can't remember the name of it. And I remember asking an Atlantic member, a member of Parliament, what would that be? Why would they not want to subscribe to Blacklocks, which is covering their work, but they're going to subscribe to a little teeny weekly paper in New Brunswick? And the MP said, well, that would be a favor to the Irvings because they owned the papers out there. This was an acknowledgement of this is how it goes. Yeah. But back in 2019, we had a story in Blacklocks, and I want to read you some of it. We had got an access to information memo where we saw government employees in charge of licensing media talking about a request to license media. And what they said was they had expressed astonishment because there were some exorbitant fees being asked to be paid to two outlets, and the request had come from an unnamed executive from higher up the ladder. And here we have these poor people at the Public Works Licensing Department saying, well, what if we received these, quote, huge, crazy media price increases, and that to go to two operators of two newspapers. At that time, it was iPolitics and the National Observer of Vancouver. And the staff said in emails, quote, yowzers, yikes, this increase is huge. How am I going to justify this? Said the procurement officer at Public Works. So this is what I mean when anybody claims, Politico in the States claims $8 million is market value, or the Toronto Star claims that $1.7 million is market value. Market value is whatever the government wants to do. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to step outside the lines and challenge federal bureaucracy, and your stories are going to be focused on accountability journalism, then your rates are going to dry up or disappear. And in the worst case scenario, we'll go to court and fight over having to pay you a pittance for subscriptions.
Yeah, and we've talked about court as well too, and I've talked to a few lawyers, and they said, well, what they can do is they can drag you through the courts like you for the past 8 years. They'll bankrupt you while you go through court, and then at the end of the day, You can't hold any of them liable either. Because, so, you may get something at the end of the day, but you probably won't be around to get it.
Well, it has been 11 years, and eventually, well, maybe the appeal court will rule for us. I'm not holding my breath, but if they do, then that means the government has to pay us for everything it stole.
Yeah.
And then sometimes when a government changes, the public service has a new master, like all of us do when a new boss comes to town. And I would propose to you, what happens if the new master is reading Jim's website, or the new master is reading Blacklock's reporter? Does a government administration or bureaucracy, do they continue to boycott the product when the political administration is reading it? How long can you stamp your foot and say, we're just not going to pay the likes of you? There's an old saying, when you fight, you win. If you keep fighting, you win. If you never stop fighting.
Yeah.
And our company's doing fine, and we have paid $500,000 in legal fees. We've paid them off. We are making money, and we have no interest in retiring. We love what we do. And so if the government wants to continue this argument and destroy paywalls in this country for everybody, and set a precedent that means passwords can be shared, and you can imagine the various permutations that could happen with that under the law. Everybody's got a password for something. If they want to do this, then we're going to make them do it with a smile and a song in our heart.
Yeah, I've dealt with government in different ways too. And one of the good pieces of advice that I've used a lot was one of the ministers I talked to. She said, just shine a light on it, and they'll scurry. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what you're trying to do, is shine a light on this stuff and make it seem so ludicrous. Like, even that tweet, should say a lot to a lot of people, that Francois Champagne thanking Politico openly for using their office. That should say a lot to a lot of people. And like, this doesn't look good. And when Canadian media is suffering, nobody could argue that media is doing better in Canada. Even CBC is going back and asking for they want more money. And then when they see an article like Jordan Peterson, when he interviewed Pierre Poilievre, and it got, I can't remember the number of views, 1 million views or something, it just went crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, then the response from some of the legacy media outlet is like, perhaps the Russians were funding it. What, paying for the microphone Jordan Peterson had, or what? Like, what funding would they have needed for that podcast?
Well, I think the sad thing about the subsidies, and you just described that, Russian bots, the sad thing about the subsidies is that they have perpetuated mediocrity. And so our media is no better today than it was, when they first got the money in 2019. That's the sad part. Mm-hmm. We really need to retool. And it hasn't happened because the welfare has perpetuated this mediocrity. And so they would rather still fight against the reality. Why did Pierre Poilievre do that interview with Peterson? Why did Trump do Joe Rogan? Yeah. Anybody who's got a podcast in Canada right now, whether you are partisan or not, will tell you why they did it. Because they're reaching more people. Pierre Poilievre, it was more than 1 million, Jim. It was something like 4 million in the first 24 hours or something. Or 1 in 4 Canadians, higher amongst young men. So in that podcast, he reaches more Canadians than the entire CTV, CBC, and global national news combined. Far more.
And more trust there too.
Well, this is the thing. So I think that some of the podcasts are partisan. I do think that they are, but you can't put a lid on free expression in Canada. You can't regulate that. You can't regulate the internet. Look at the efforts they've done to try to regulate the internet. And all it's done is hurt more people trying to have startups and improve opportunities in our business for young journalists like you.
Yeah, so the thing is that I would put to the Liberal government or any government, you've been trying to meddle in media for a long time. Just put the stock charts up of these public companies, Chorus, Glacier, Post Media, put them up and tell me if they're better or worse. And then look at the layoffs in all those outlets and journalism. And if you even look at the person running for office right now that's going to become the Prime Minister likely in the next month here. He's doing interviews on BBC and CNN and not even engaging with long form interviews with national media outlets that they're funding.
You're talking about Mr. Carney. I think they're trying to, he's not quite ready for prime time yet. An executive office for most of your life never prepares you for
Yeah,
the sweat and the dirt of politics. Just ask Michael Ignatieff.
yeah,
So, I mean, I think they're trying to control Mr. Carney by offering him up to these other news agencies. But the thing is, who are they reaching? I mean,
yeah,
Canadians aren't watching those,
no.
right? So
So
they're barely watching the national news.
I don't know if you want to talk about it, but like we could have three prime ministers in a period of a few months here. This is, and we still have Perot government, and we have a court case pending there as well in the next few days here to see if they
Hmm.
can force. I doubt if that'll have any effect, but
You won't.
um,
I doubt
yeah,
too. Yeah,
it's kind of a kind
it's a
of just
government's right to prorogue.
yeah, and then obviously today there might be some people that drop out of the liberal leadership race because it's another $125,000 today that they have to put up. So it'll be interesting to see how many are left for this actual liberal leadership race.
I think there's a lot of people who think that because it seems to be a, I guess anything's possible, but seems to be a foregone conclusion. And with most of the caucus on cabinet for sure on the side of Mr. Carney, that they should do like they did for Robert Borden, just have a caucus meeting and vote for a leader and get on with it. Go to the
Yeah.
polls, go to the people. But Prime Minister Arthur Meehan used to complain he was bitter enemies with Liberal Prime Minister Mackenzie King, and King, one of the longest serving prime ministers. And Meehan used to say that Mackenzie King hung on to power like a lobster with lockjaw. And that's, I was thinking about that this morning. That's happening again.
Yeah, yeah, clearly, clearly. Um, it's kind of like I think like one of the questions, if we could ask questions of these liberal leadership candidates, is will you call an election? I think that's the question that's on most Canadians' minds. Is that will that be one of your first acts of government? But an answer
There
to
was,
Canadians.
there was some alarm in media that Mr. Carney had apparently been consulted on the talks, trade war with Mr. Trump by other members of the cabinet who are still engaged in that. And there was some outrage that why are we consulting an outsider and a businessman who's never been elected about the affairs of state, which are supposed to be confidential. Obviously, they think it's because he's the heir apparent. But in the run up to any leadership, especially when the government is unpopular, I can't get too excited about any of it
Yeah.
because it won't. Believe me, when change comes, we won't even remember we were having this conversation. I don't think Canadians are that engaged with what cabinet's doing. I mean,
Yeah.
they're going down to Washington and meeting with Politico. So if they want to
Yeah.
brief Mr. Carney on Politico, you see what I'm saying? Like no
Hmm.
one's listening to cabinet, let alone being concerned about what they're telling Mark Carney.
Yeah. Have you ever followed Polymarkets?
No, what?
So it's kind of interesting. You should go check it out. Polymarkets is the betting market, and I've been following it along ever since, like the Trump uh, campaign, and that the
Oh,
Polymarkets are
Polymarkets predicted Trump's victory, right?
yeah, and predict a lot of different things. And right now, there's a 95% chance that Mark Carney wins the Liberal leadership race, and I think, and it shows you the graph as it moves along, and it shows you, the likelihood of a conservative majority and all these things. There's tons of things you could bet on. Whether Taylor Swift what song she's going to sing first, what venue she's going. You can bet on almost anything. But these poly markets tend to be pretty accurate compared to some of these polls. You'll see an Ecos poll that shows the Liberals way out in front, and then a Main Street poll that's the other way, and all these polls tend to have different flavors
Yeah, well,
in them.
that's
But
the other thing, just as there's friendly media, there's also friendly
hmm
pollsters. You
yeah,
mentioned two of them on either side of the partisan divide there. So we always say at Blacklock, we don't read the polls. We don't pay any attention to
yeah,
the polls. The only polls we read are the ones that are conducted among Canadians by the Privy Council on
mm,
various. This is the administrative
yeah,
arm of the Prime Minister's office. Why is that? Because those polls are the only ones they read. That's the only ones the prime
mm,
minister and cabinet read because it's going to tell you what they're going to do and what their intentions are. So, as far as the horse race polls, uh,
yeah,
sure. I mean, it's
yeah,
like it's like entertainment, right? It's
yeah.
like
And
commercials at the Super Bowl.
but we do recognize that polls work. We saw that in the BC election because I think that's the reason Kevin Falcon, the money dried up for him, and that's the reason he dropped out because the polls are pushing him basically pushing him out. So they do have an effect, and I think that's why they do them, right? And that's why they're partisan, for sure. But like the only thing that the point I was trying to make is that take a look at poly markets, because sometimes it seems to be because people have to put money down to actually, like
All
pick.
right.
Do you know what I mean?
I
So it's
see.
interesting. Anyway, I won't keep you too long. Interesting times for sure. And any prediction for an election
When?
date? Yeah.
It depends what day you ask me.
Yeah.
We have, I'm not going to put money on it,
Yeah.
but I would say that they, as much as they would like to survive till October, I don't think they can without risking just an all-out. First of all, they need some spending bills
Yeah.
because the government runs out of money at the end of March.
Yeah.
So I don't see unless Mr. Singh, who keeps telling us that he's not going to support any government,
Yeah.
that he's going to support non-confidence motion.
Yeah.
No, it's totally possible that he may change his mind. He changes his mind quite a lot. But at this point, I would say that we won't have to wait for October for an
Yeah, I'm
election.
pretty
But
sure. I would bet on a spring election at some point here, but
maybe May.
yeah, something like that. So, they'll get in there and maybe they'll do some business. But I do think it really weakens Canada's position to deal with Trump if we don't have a clear leader that we know it's going to be there for a while, right? Like even if Carney tries to, and I'm saying Carney because it looks like it's going to be Carney, even if he tries to prolong it into October, it's still the administration down there is going to look at it as a lame duck leadership too.
That's right. And in terms of election outcomes, I want to remind you of another history fun fact. So in the fall of 1993, when Brian Mulroney and the Conservatives were loathed, and then Kim Campbell got the job that June, there was a bump in the polls. Now you see where I'm heading?
Yeah.
There was a bump in the polls.
Yep.
She was wonderful. She's pretty. She's
Yep.
smart. She speaks Russian. She's a lawyer, right?
Yep.
And then they went to the campaign, and the Conservatives came out of it with 2 seats.
Yeah,
So
I do remember that. Yeah.
we're responding to now. I'm sure the Liberals are very excited about their little bump recently with Mr. Carney, but I would just remind you of that watershed election of 1993, and I think we could be facing another once in a generation type of election outcome.
And we saw what you're talking about play out in the United States too, right? Joe Biden was sinking in the polls. They did the old switcheroo, kind of a coronation as well. And then, like there was that honeymoon phase, and then and it looked like she was leading in most of the polls, or they said that she was leading in the polls, and then, the reality was different.
And don't forget the Liberals really risk angering people by being seen to drag it out till October too. I think that will be untenable as well.
I think most people realize how selfish it is. And the other thing, the climate change agenda that they said was paramount, like the biggest platform that they ran on, is clearly being tossed now.
It's like the last 9 years was a dream, Jim.
Yeah.
The capital gains tax is not appropriate either.
Yeah, like it's just crazy. I just posted Justin Trudeau's rant, when he gets into that really dramatic rant. He was just ranting not 6 months ago how climate change is an existential threat, and how the Conservatives are going to destroy the country. And here it is, all the candidates now are saying it's not as big a problem as,
You have to wonder about our environment minister, Mr. Gibault, the environmental activist who led us to believe that this carbon tax and climate change plan was an existential issue for him in the fight of his life.
Yeah.
He said nothing, by the way.
And then I did hear a comment from him saying, well, I can just take my stuff and go home, so I'll just have to figure out a different way. I'm just like, there's a lot of Canadians suffering right now while you're figuring out a different way. And
That's true.
And we find ourselves in this predicament with Trump because we haven't had access to other markets with our natural wealth that's beneath our feet. And now they're saying we need to do something, but pipelines
now we need energy's pipeline.
Yeah, pipelines take 10 years.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Wilkinson, who muses about having it now, could have started 9 years ago.
Absolutely. So anyway, I do thank you for your time. I love your work. We talk about your work all the time.
Thank you.
We need more media outlets like that in Canada, and not the ones that are being, fed by the government.
We
What's
always
that?
say, imagine if there were 10
Yeah.
accountability, 10 Blacklocks in Ottawa, 10 different media outlets doing accountability journalism.
Yeah.
Canadians would have the best government they've ever had.
And I've said this over and over and over again. Media's number one mission is to hold power accountable, and you do an amazing job doing that. We can only hope to do a fraction of that, but I think most media outlets should be doing that, not parroting government.
But there's something else too. We have a sincere conviction that people say, "Oh, you're just writing big bad things." We have a sincere conviction that by writing about the failure of some programs, the waste, the mediocrity, not talking about the politicians, I'm talking about the big machine, the government. We sincerely believe that by exposing those things, that then they'll be corrected.
Yeah.
And that's media's role, isn't it? To
Yeah.
help get better government. Forget who's the prime minister.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah,
talking about the
exactly,
mechanism of
exactly.
government.
But do you see the monster that's being created in the States as they cut off the food supply with Doge? You see that?
Well, right. Yeah. Some people have said, oh, Blacklock should be our Doge, but I think the whole Doge thing is kind of, I don't know. I think it's part of Trump's hysterics too. Like he likes to keep people in hysterics.
But I'm just saying, as you cut off the funding, the money supply, and holy cow,
Oh,
do you see some ugliness come out?
yes, amongst public servants. And I think you might see that here after the
No.
next election.
I think most Canadians are going to start asking for accountability, and so that'll put you in a great position. And other media outlets like yourselves, and what we hope to be is where we can really ask for accountability and get access to politicians too, because it's really tough to get access to these people.
It is. Well, not for us. We're here, but they resent the fact that we are here. But anyway, we are. So let's try to clean up and do a little better on those audits and clean up waste. And that's the idea after all. And I thank you too for your subscription, Jim.
You bet. And we do thank you, and we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now,